Hi there. So in this video, we're going to do the fourth practice problem set about monopoly. And this is actually from an AP economics question, and it's a long AP economics question. So it's supposed to take half an hour. I bet we're probably going to be able to do it a little bit faster though. So this is the picture right here. And I'm going to actually leave it up here because the questions are split onto another page with some places for you to write as you're going through. But I do think it might be helpful for you, like as you're doing it, where you can write on the piece of paper. So I'm gonna kind of try to do both, but probably fail at it, which that's par for the course, right? So here we are. The first one says the graph shows the demand and cost curves of a firm that does not price discriminate. Now we know what that means. It means that the marginal revenue and the demand curve are separated from each other, which is what we see in the graph. Part A says, suppose the firm produces at the profit maximizing output. Well, we know as soon as we see that, we're going to look for MR equals MC, right? Identify the level of output and the price. So if we're looking at where does MR equal MC, well, that's going to be at point H. If you look at the graph right below, point H, and well, what's the quantity associated with point H? That's Q2. So that's a level of output. But at Q2, remember they price on the demand curve. So look at the demand curve, right? Demand curve at Q2, and that's going to be point B, but that's not a price, so don't put B. That's the common mistake that students will make, is they'll just write B for the price. That's not a price, that's a point on the curve. The price is over to the axis, so that's going to be P5. Okay. Next, suppose the firm produces at the revenue maximizing output. Now this one you have to think back to the couple lectures ago actually, where we looked at like what's the relationship between total revenue and elasticity and the demand curve, the marginal revenue. We did this in the second lecture. And so this is the idea of where does marginal revenue equals 0? So that's revenue maximizing is where marginal revenue is crossing that x-axis. And so that's going to be right at Q3. If you look at the graph right below, they cross at Q3. And if we said you have to produce Q3, they're going to go up to the demand curve and they're going to price from there. So if we go up from Q3, we notice it's at point D on the demand curve. And then we go over to the price and we should see P3 is the price at that level. Okay, so now it says, suppose the government regulates the price to produce allocative efficient level of output. And so we know that's where supply equals demand or marginal cost equals the price. And so we're going to find where is that. And we look for marginal cost and demand, or the price, and we see that that's going to occur at point G. And so now what's the price that they're going to have to set in order to get to that point G? It'll be P1, the price that goes along with point G. And then it says the allocative efficient level of output. Well, that's just whatever quantity it is with point G, so that's Q4. Okay, now it says, suppose the firm produces at that socially efficient level. Now, one thing I want to just quickly point out to you, right, is something interesting about this graph before we get into like that actual answer of that question, because I said I would bring this up before. You have these two types of efficiency. You have allocative and you have productive. And what we would say is that perfectly competitive firms in the long run are both allocative and productively efficient. And what that literally means is that they produce the quantity. So these are the two types of efficiencies. And I'm just going to write down the same, these are all different things that mean the same thing, right? The quantity where supply equals demand, the quantity where marginal cost equals the price, where we call it the optimal, right? Socially optimal. Socially optimal is another word for that. We also call that one maximizing total surplus, right? Not necessarily the producer or the consumer, but we're maximizing total. All of those things mean the same thing. Productive efficiency is a different thing, and that literally means you're producing the quantity at minimum ATC. Now, if you remember from the perfectly competitive markets, they do produce there, right? They produce in a kind of graph that looks like that. You've got Mr. DARP, marginal revenue, and then you've got marginal cost. And in the long run, that ATC comes down, hits its minimum, goes back up. And so they are producing at the minimum of ATC. So we'd say perfectly competitive firms do this, right? They do that because we have Mr. DARP. And so they do fulfill both. But what about this monopolist? Are they allocative efficient? In a normal situation, no, they're going to produce Q2, which in that circumstance, that's not where supply and demand are, because this is the optimal. where supply and demand are. That's where marginal cost and price are equal to each other. But we actually know, so this would be the optimal. I'm going to keep writing optimal so you can see it other places. And this is the actual, the quantity that they will produce is Q2. So they aren't allocative, but are they productive efficient? No, they're not, right? If you notice, what would be productive efficient? We'll look at the minimum of the ATC. That would be here. So productive efficiency is also not going to be satisfied by this monopolist. And so sometimes you're going to see questions that will ask you about productive efficiency instead of allocative. And in fact, I think productive efficiency is easier to notice than allocative efficiency because it's really just, are they at the quantity where there's a minimum ATC? And if they're not, then they're not productive efficient. Now, deadweight loss is the one that happens, deadweight loss if you're not allocative. There isn't really a related term for that idea of productive efficiency. We would just say you're kind of operating at a wasteful amount because you're not at the most lowest cost or least cost production point. Okay, now, sorry for that aside, but I thought it was going to be useful for you. And I do think one last point about this, being able to see both of these on a graph is pretty helpful. The last thing you're sometimes going to see are questions that ask about fair return or break even. Or, right, these are all terms that also mean the same thing. Normal profit, and we use capital Pi for profit. We don't use P because that's for price. Or another one is to say price equals the ATC at the quantity that we're producing at. And so all of those things mean the same thing. And we would notice that at Q2, at the starred level here, that's also not the case, right? That price doesn't equal the ATC because price is P5. And we can see that at C is actually where, where the ATC is. So this firm would be earning a profit if they were allowed to and produced Q2, and the ATC value is P4. So this firm is earning a positive economic profit. It's not breaking even or fair return or normal profit. If we wanted to, we could regulate them to P4, to P3, and that would accomplish that. If we regulated them to P3, then that would mean the price is P3, and that's where the average total cost curve is. Okay, now I'm going to go back to the actual problem. Suppose the firm produces at the allocative efficient level of output. Okay, so we've kind of talked through that level, and we know that that's going to be at Q4, and it says, are they earning a profit or a loss? Well, just to switch back for a second here, at this optimal level, compare the price that they would be receiving. Well, the price is on the demand curve. Price is on the demand curve, so that's here. Well, what's the ATC? The ATC is up here. So ATC at this level, price is less than the ATC. The ATC exceeds it at that level. And so that indicates to us that this firm is earning a loss. And the loss rectangle would be like here to here to here to here. So it's kind of this long skinny rectangle that goes all the way over that point, right? So we would say they are earning a loss. And using the labeling, identify the area of loss. Oh, well, that's just exactly what we just did. So that would be E, G, P2, and P1. P2 and P1. Using the labeling, identify the surplus, consumer surplus, at the allocative efficient level of output. So all of these are dependent on you being able to identify the allocative efficient level of output. So it's obviously kind of an important point, right? Make sure you know how to do that. Now, if we were at allocative efficient, that means we're pricing at P1 because that's the optimal point. That's where supply and demand intercept. So if you're at P1, that's the price, and then you go all the way up the demand curve. So there's a huge, huge triangle of consumer surplus. It goes from, we'd say this like P7 point, we don't really have a letter there, down to P1 and then over to G. And so using the labeling, all right, well, how about we just say P7, P1, G. And then the last thing says, suppose the regulators establish a price that allows the firm to just cover its opportunity costs. Using the labeling, identify the price they would set. So what does that correspond to? Well, what is that one? That's not productive efficiency. That's not covering your costs. It's not allocative because we've already looked at socially optimal, so it must be this one. And so we're going to add just one more here, cover all your costs, but not earn a penny more, right? And so that would be, where's the price equal the ATC? And so where does the demand curve, the price curve, intercept this ATC? And we can go and go, boop, point D. And so the point D is the intercept of those. So what would be the price that they would choose to do that? Point D would be P3. Okay, lots of thoughts on this one. If you have any questions, pop into the Google Meet, send me an email. This is a tough problem, but I think you're going to do well with it. Good luck. See you next time.